Welcome to CFO 4.0, the future of finance. The CFO role is changing rapidly, moving from cost controller to strategic visionary. And with every change comes opportunity. We are here to help you take advantage of this transition, to win at work, drive your career forwards, and lead with confidence. Join Hannah Munro, Managing Director of ITAS, a financial transformation consultancy, as she interviews key experts to give you real-world advice and guidance on how to transform your processes, people, and data. Welcome to CFO 4.0, the future of finance.
So hello everybody and welcome to this episode of CFO 4.0, and we are talking all about life in private equity as a CFO, and this is a particularly relevant episode for those that are either looking to get into private equity as a CFO or perhaps have just got that first role. So today we're going to talk about the first 100 days in a new role as a private equity CFO. So with me is our expert and guru, I'm going to keep calling him that though, I'm not sure he's that impressed with that title, is Rich Sanders, who is obviously been with us throughout this series to talk about private equity and give us that insight into what's going on. So welcome, Rich, and as always, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Yeah, brilliant to be here. I think this is going to be a good one.
So tell us, from your perspective, what should a CFO, whether they're new to private equity or new to that particular organization, what should they be thinking about in the first 100 days?
So look, I think most CFOs, if they're in the first 100 days of a deal, will have been in the business probably for a while. But what I might carve out from this as we go through is there will be some CFOs that are parachuted into a situation and haven't been in the company up until that point. And there's slight differences between those two streams. But if I start with the main one, which is where you've been a CFO for a while and now you're in private equity ownership, and it's all different, isn't it? And you've got lots of new things to get used to. And the answer is, yeah, you do. But actually the basics are where you need to start. So the absolute priority is you understanding the business, how it's performing, in order that you can then avoid any negative surprises, particularly, but surprises of any type over that first 100 days. Like you versus nearly everybody else across the company are in that position where you're expected to understand the company, how it works, and protect the private equity house from surprises. Like early warning is definitely a good thing. Ideally, nothing that's a deviation from the plan. But certainly you're the one that's seen to be that link pin to make sure the business is well understood and it's being well reported on.
And you talked about the deviation from the plan because, and we've talked actually on previous episodes, we talked about the dangers of over-promising and under-delivering. What is, if you've not been involved in that planning process, perhaps, how should you be thinking about that first 100 days if you're coming into the role as somebody perhaps that has been maybe parachuted in to that role? What should you be thinking about?
There is a moment straight after the deal where everyone has a bit of deal fatigue. Okay, and there's some practical human factors in this. And this might seem like a tangent, but I think it's very relevant. The investor director will have got the deal done. Like that's their job. They have got the deal done on behalf of the private equity house. The vendor, and maybe you've got a founder who's stepping back, they've just actually received a lot of money. What a relief. But they've also got a whole load of new things to get used to. The rest of the management team, great new start, let's go. CEO who's hopefully like raising the banner energetically, and off we go. But you've got this moment straight after the deal is done where everyone's actually tired from having sat on all those documents, in all those meetings, and doing that in addition to the day job. So there's a readjustment, like week or two. It probably is only a week or two before you're into the first board. Whether you're new or whether you're established, you can use that 2-week window to do an objective check on where you are. So if you're coming in new, what you absolutely have to do is to go around your finance team and the rest of the company, looking under every stone, in the back of every cupboard, to flush out problems. Now, at the same time as doing that, I'll always talk about the negative, perhaps to begin with, but it gives you opportunities as well. So, like, there are situations I've faced where you find out cash isn't being managed as well as it could be. That's not a problem, actually. It's an opportunity. It's brilliant because you can manage cash better. You might find actually there's a bit of litigation going on that nobody knew about. Okay, well, that probably is only negative, but better that you know week 1 than you find out, week 10 when you haven't prepared for it. So you do have this window where you get to drag everything into the light. And especially if you're parachuted in, you have to do a diagnostic because everybody else has just gone through a deal process where they feel like everything has been scrutinized for an incredibly long period of time. However, it's scrutinized through a certain lens. It's scrutinized by financial due diligence experts who never sit in the business, who visit the business, and so don't really know. They can never really know exactly the dynamics of what's going on. You've got a plan that's been put together inevitably like 12 months prior to the investment. So the plan might be slightly out of date. That, like, systems move forward, your market moves forward, competitors do things. It all needs, you've got a window where you can go and do a diagnostic, internal and external, to say, are we well placed to deliver the plan? And am I, as a CFO, well placed to advise the board, run the finance department and whatever other responsibilities I've got? And if I'm not, where there's opportunities, where there's risks, job day 1 is surface those problems and at least talk about them with your CEO and the rest of the exec.
If you had to put a number on it, how long do you think that window is that you have really, or you should be focusing on pulling out those issues?
I mean, I think it's partly what the whole of the 100 days is about. So to an extent, like, what you're doing in the first 100 days is you're making sure that the plan is the right plan, that you're equipped to go and deliver it, and that you've made some significant progress in delivering it. So if you want to change the plan, that's the window to do it. And most private equity have a 3-year window that they'll then be looking to exit under. So if you don't change the plan in the first 100 days, we've talked before about the first 18 months being the time that you can really affect a business. First 3 months of those 18 months, critical to do it. So I think to an extent, you have the whole of the 100 days, but the best time to do it is actually in the first month. And like, a critical milestone is the first proper board meeting. So depending on when you complete the deal, that might be 2-3 weeks later. So later on in that same month, or it might be the month after. That first board meeting can be instrumental in terms of setting momentum, demonstrating competence, and giving confidence to an investor director that you're on the right path. So, like, this kind of 2 phases there, if that makes sense. So up until the first board meeting, critical, but then you really do have the whole of the first 100 days to deliver these. It's often the bad news that you want to get out of the way, or the deviations that are just a confusion. But nearly always there's a plan that mitigates them, or makes them actually into opportunities.
And, when would you start planning for the first 100 days? You mentioned, obviously, deal fatigue. Imagine, you're a CFO, you've just been through this massive deal process. Everyone's tired. When do you start thinking about that first 100 days? Do you have the capacity pre-deal?
Super early, right? So I think, maybe I haven't spoken about this enough, one of the reasons people want to work within private equity is it's dynamic, quick decision making. You can get on with it. You can accelerate. So it's one of those daydream type things. Like, if I ran this company, what would I do? That's actually planning for the first 100 days. So when I meet management teams, and maybe we know it's going to be 6 months before we can transact, it's start a list. Like, have a jotter, have a piece of paper, old school, on your desk. Every time something frustrates you and you think, oh, I think we could do that better, put it on the list. Put it on the list. Put it on the list. Now, in the first 100 days, you're not going to do all of those things. Like, you won't get through all of them. But actually, that's the first stage of planning, is actually gathering everybody's thoughts around how you can improve the business. Some of those will be really small things. They're just minor annoyances, daft things like, why haven't we got a microwave in the staff room? Right? Why haven't we done that? And it'll be, again, because a lack of dynamic decision making or something like that. So you have some daft ones in there that, of course, you can act on. But big ones like, I want to change a system, and actually things that involve a significant change process. I want to restructure the way that we're going to market. That they go on the list as well. So I think you start actually in your day job really early. We've talked about there being a 1 to 2 year window in prep. I think you start right at the beginning of that. In reality, like, this accelerates when you're doing diligence. So when financial diligence and legal diligence and commercial diligence is being done, those advisors bring up really valid points that an investor will have a problem with, and that's your action plan. So by the time that you're exiting again, you should have dealt with most of those things. And some of those bits of advice and those actions will immediately improve the business. So in that, let's say it's the 3 to 6 months prior to the deal, there's some really rich documentation there that tells you, it's often like a couple of hundred actions from those things. If you look at them properly, there's a couple of hundred actions to add to your list that's on your desk. So I think that furnishes it with quite a lot. And then you've got to go around the rest of your team. So, and this is again, maybe it's the month before. It's definitely in those first couple of weeks in the new business, in the new ownership. What do you now think are the highest priorities? Is there anything else that competitors are doing that we need to react to? Those types of things. Because again, the market's constantly moving, competitors are moving, these priorities will shift. And that should give a really rich list of things to pick from for your first 100 days.
And, in terms of the expectations, what is the outward expectation from PE companies within that first 100 days? What are they expecting to see? Because obviously they're expecting you to be doing all of this, but what's the outcomes that they're looking for from you in that first 100 days?
So the 100 days or the 90-day plan, it depends on the house as to how they talk about it, but something of that order of time. It's a communication tool as well as an action plan and a program. So I think it would be rare that there isn't a private equity. Most private equity houses would want to see what's the 90-day plan prior to the deal. So you've got to have a version of it. You can then amend it in the first few weeks and come up with a revised. So it's a communication tool. So one thing they want is clarity around what the priorities are in the business, making sure that there's enough being attempted, but not too much. So you're not spreading yourself too thin. That where there's a need for further analysis before you act, that's happening early, as opposed to trying to act and then finding out you don't know enough. That's a critical thing. Are you well resourced enough to go after all of that's in the first 90 or 100 days? And are you well resourced enough for what you need to do in the plan over the first 3 years? Those are critical things. So I think you can think about, reporting, systems, people, proposition, marketing, and so on in the 100 days. And not all of the 100 days will obviously fall to the CFO, but in my experience, it's often the CFO or the ops director or the CEO that ends up running the 100-day plan. Now, some houses will inject a program manager or project manager in, a PMO, to help with what might be more of a transformation. But as a CFO, you've got to be thinking, like, if there isn't somebody else appointed, it's probably on you to keep a very close eye on what's going on in the 100 days in order that the right priorities are picked at the beginning, you deliver, and you're credible at the end of it.
And this is the real point of clarification, because I'm not sure whether we talked about this in any of our episodes, but is there an expectation for a 100-day plan as part of the acquisition process? Are they expecting to see that ahead of time?
I would always have one. I'm working on a deal at the moment. We're probably a few weeks away from completing. I've got it's a 100-day plan that's got too many actions on it. So we've got to prioritize. But we know so many things from the diligence phase that we need to do. It's just a question of when we do them. The bit that's missing there is further interaction with the rest of the company that has to happen post-completion. So we need to add that element in. So there's a real example of, we've probably had that for 2 months. So it's been building and building. I I think there are houses where they would just leave that to the management team. But like if the private equity house doesn't need it, your CEO should need it. Your chair should need it. You should need it. So I struggle to see a situation where it's not valid. And even if it's just for your own, objective setting and communication to this now wider stakeholder group, I would always initiate it. Like any CFO came to me with advice, have a 100-day plan. Because if someone else is not talking about it, it doesn't mean they're not expecting it.
Yeah. No, that's a really good shout. When things go wrong, because things will happen. We all know this is the real world. At least you've got something to fall back on to say, well, this is the plan, right? This is what we're aiming to achieve, and this is how far we are in that. Yeah,
I think that's right. I mean, one way of interpreting that is you're going through a transition. There's a change in expectations. There's likely to be a need to change behaviors. So what you need through that is you need good communication and ideally alignment of objectives. And that's what I mean about the 90-day, 100-day plan being a really good tool for that, because it can go wrong in at least two directions, in that you don't attempt enough or you attempt too much.
Yeah.
Right? And a whole load of other things as well. But if you haven't, as an exec, sat down and discussed that, it will go wrong. Like you will be suboptimal. It might be that your performance is okay, but it won't be as much as you could have done. And actually, if you can get a running start at an investment phase, you get confidence, you get follow-on investment, you create opportunities. You can do another acquisition, even though that might not have been part of the plan. You get that positive, virtuous circle of confidence. Whereas actually, if you're deemed to be in a situation where you're having to be prodded to move things along, or actually if there's a risk that comes up that hadn't previously been identified and isn't well planned for or mitigated by you as a team, you start to get private equity stepping closer towards you in a negative way. You destroy their confidence in you, and that's the negative spiral you want to avoid.
One of the hardest things, I think, is actually putting into words what it means to work with myself and the team here at ITAS. Because not only are we a financial transformation consultancy, but we do it using Sage technology. So rather than me tell you how awesome we are, let me introduce one of our customers.
Working with ITAS has dramatically made our lives simpler. Because there's just such a knowledgeable team there to help us. Before we felt the consultants we were working with at another company, it was always a challenge to get information out of them, for them to understand the problem, and it just didn't feel like they were on our team. Working with ITAS, it's almost, we feel like you are all employed with us to work with us to do it. It's an absolutely fantastic relationship, and it's just made it such a smoother process and an absolute fun process working in Sage Intact and coming on our calls. I look forward to it now.
And let's just talk about that comment, the change in expectations, because obviously that change is going to happen pretty quickly. We're talking 100 days, but let's be honest, as soon as the deal's done, there's an expectation that's going to start to set. How do you manage that effectively as a CFO? Because as an organization, you might not be geared up to meet that expectation around reporting, etc. And you would hope some of that would come out in due diligence, but almost how do you mitigate that, the risk that you're, of private equity stepping closer during that 100 days, and give them the confidence to let you get on with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes private equity stepping closer can be what you need, but it's got to be for the right reasons. So I would always absolutely preach about transparency and being reasonable and pragmatic. So nobody wants anything beyond a challenging but achievable target. Like if you have unreasonable, unsustainable targets, well, it won't work for very long. You might be able to sprint for a month, but you'll fall over in the second month, or it'll drop away. So I think the issues I see is that lack of communication, lack of transparency. So I'd start there. The second thing I'd say in the companies that we've taken over and I've seen being taken over in terms of change of ownership is there's often that step of just diagnosing where you are versus perhaps where you'd hoped to be doesn't happen. And you need to take your rose-tinted spectacles off, because up until the deal, you've been selling and buying. Like you've been selling to a future investor. You've maybe been kidding yourself about some things. Now you're in the team. Now it's your business as well. You've probably got some share ownership. Be realistic. So if that means that you need another management accountant, but it's for good reason, have the conversation early. You know, that is much better than struggling on with a situation you know won't work or you suspect won't work. And it might be that you're having that conversation with your CEO. You definitely should be. It might be that you're having it with the CEO and the investor director to say, look, it's now, middle of the year. We thought we'd do this at the beginning of the year. Things have changed a bit versus the original plan. Here's how we deal with that. So that means a bit more cost and maybe a delay to this, but I think in the medium term, this is going to be better. That's a much better conversation than at the end of the 100 days going, yeah, I didn't manage to hit what I said I'd do. But, what do you expect? I've only got so many people. I haven't got the capability in house. It's like, that's going to get much less positive attention than actually just voicing these things early and with a plan to do something about them. So different private equity houses will have different characters as to what do you voice, who needs to hear what at what point. Do you talk about that in a board meeting? Do you give them a call? Do you have an offsite where you get to know each other for a couple of days and you voice all of these concerns and you work on the plan together? It really depends on the type of investor. But in that first 100 days, those conversations, those thoughts, that replanning needs to happen at some level, or it's better if it happens.
And we've talked already about that first, or we mentioned in passing that first board meeting. How do you as a CFO make sure that first one is a successful one? Like you're setting out your stall as an organization well. What should you be thinking about?
Basics, basics, basics. So I've seen people think that they've absolutely got to do some kind of presidential speech. They've suddenly got to act in a completely different way in the board meeting under private equity ownership versus what they were doing before. It can feel very different. And like we've walked in situations where a board meeting was 8 hours and we've turned it into 2.5 hours because we just don't believe that meetings longer than a couple of hours are worthwhile. Like it was draining the 8 hours on people before, and we were never party to that. So there are some significant differences, but the basics will get you through it, especially that first one. So have an agenda. Have a pack that follows the agenda. Have thought about, in the financials in particular, make sure that it's accurate to start off with. And sometimes it's not, right? So if it's not accurate, be clear about why not. Because sometimes you can't get there in the first few weeks. But be clear about why it's inaccurate and what you're doing about it. Try and have your key elements of financial reporting sorted out. So what are the 3 to 5 most important things that need to be discussed in the financials, particularly if there's a CFO? Is it revenue? Is it gross margin? Is it the pipeline? Is it your labor cost control? What is it? And start the process somewhere solid of educating your private equity owner about how board meetings need to run. At the end of the board meeting, have minutes, have actions, and be ready to follow them up. Every action needs an owner and a deadline. They're real basics, but most meetings, let alone board meetings, would be improved by those basics. If you deliver on those things and people don't grandstand in the board meeting itself, or think, like I'm saying about the presidential speech, or actually, they're acting outside of their normal behavior pattern, then actually you'll have a good meeting. And what will be clear to the investor director and everybody else is what you need to improve it for the next month. So you're not expected to be perfect in that first meeting, but that means be solid, like make it a foundation that you can build from, which is why the basics of meeting structure, good organization and great reporting, the basics of that are the right foundation for them building relationship over the next 3 years.
You know what? I think at some point we're going to have to unpick the 8-hour meeting to 2.5. What makes a good board meeting, I think, is a topic for a different conversation, because that sounds fascinating. But, we talked about, having a strong agenda. Give us a few highlights of things that you focus on when you're working with a new organization, new investment, to make sure that their board meeting agenda is actually going to add value.
So particularly in this first 100 days window, there is a lack of understanding in many directions. The private equity house and the investor director do not understand the market as well as they would like. Regardless of their sector expertise, the commercial diligence that was done, or how effective the management team have been in describing it, they want to understand more. So you'll go slightly further into client interactions, competitor activity, and how you're performing in the market in the sense of like market dynamics. And typically that's the CEO, business development director or sales director, marketing director maybe. Those people can lead that dialogue, and there's an education process that is valuable both ways, because you hear what the private equity investor thinks of those dynamics that you've been dealing with as an executive manager, and the perspective is different. So something that seems like an opportunity to you might look like a one-off thing that will not be valuable at sale to a private equity house. And actually stepping through those things early, hopefully you've done an amount of this in the early, like pre-deal and whatever, but you will not have done it all, and you will not have understood it all, and you're not expected to have understood it all either. So that's really valuable to step through that. And sometimes you might actually even commission extra market work in the first 6 months to inform everybody and get everybody aligned around that market understanding. So what are the key purchase criteria for a set of customers? It's always changing. There's always value in that exercise. Why not do it in the first 6 months? That's the market. On the financials, it's similar. There'll be a lot in the financials that's well understood. And in some circumstances, actually, the private equity house will understand the financials possibly even better than the majority of the company, because they've been picking over them and picking over them and picking them over them for the last few months. So I think in the financials, what you want is accuracy, and you want transparency of assumption. So assumptions around your accruals processes, what is in that line item, the real basic stuff that, again, most of that should have come out in diligence, but it never fully comes out. And actually a finance director or CFO that's in situ, sometimes this is harder for you because you've got custom and practice and habit. You think you understand it. The fresh eyes of a private equity house might unpick something that you can't really easily see. So I would go down the whole of the P&L and the balance sheet, and obviously cash flow sort of follows from that, but going, what actually is in that line item? And is that the right structure for us going forwards? If we've got a growth plan that relies on a particular niche product, should we pull that out as a separate P&L or part of the P&L? How should we structure this going forwards? There's an opportunity in that first 100 days to do some of that, to explain that to the private equity house, and also get their wisdom about how do they look at things from the outside, which will really inform your own view. So I think those two critical things. Then the organization would be the third area. So you are always learning about the people, their motivation, their behaviors. Do you have the right level of resources, right capability sets? Are you training them well enough? Inevitably, that actually gets less attention than it should in diligence. And I think not just in the first 100 days, but the first 6 months, if you don't start acting on that organizational piece early, you won't get there in the normal window of a private equity hold. For us, we've got 6 years. It's different. Like, we can delay some of that. We can sit and observe and understand a company for a lot longer. But for most private equity, you've actually got to get onto that in the first 3 to 6 months. Otherwise, you won't make a material difference if you need to by the time you're getting ready to sell.
And we've talked about, obviously, building relationships with the private equity. And, we talked about the investment director as well being a critical part of that. What do you need to think about in those first 100 days in terms of working with that investment director and, and making sure that communication is going well?
Yeah, so if you're a CFO, you often are the link between an investor director and the board. So you should think about having one-to-one sessions with the investor director. And if they don't suggest it, you suggest it. And that might be, it depends. It might be every month. It might be every quarter. It might be that you go for a beer with them or a coffee. Understanding the dynamic of the private equity house can fall to you as the CFO. Now, if you've got a chair or a non-exec that the investor director has appointed, then often they will act as that go-between. And so the same would apply, but to that chairperson. But it's your responsibility actually to understand what's expected of you directly, but also understand actually what the sensitivities are of that individual, either firsthand by talking to them direct as an investor director or through your chair, because there's lots of variety in there. Like when they've looked at as an individual, so not as their private equity house, when they've looked at this deal, what are they worried about? What are they excited about? What happens if this is a success for them inside of their own organization? What happens if this looks different to the plan for them inside of their organization? Yeah, those are 4 good questions just to start off with that tell you a little bit about the dynamic, because the investor director is a representative of the private equity house and ultimately of their investment committee. So they will have internal politics. They will have stuck their neck out for this deal or not. They will have staked reputation or not. They might have inherited the deal from somebody else. And so it actually might be that you want to build a relationship with a more senior individual as well within the private equity house. You can work that out by having that discussion. And it's well worthwhile you going and having that discussion. Like I've never had a problem with anyone ever coming to me and saying, can we just talk about what your expectations are of me and of the company in the first 3 months, first 3 years, or whatever it might be? It can only improve things. And it shows proactive, motivated, energetic, capability. It's great. It's what you want. And again, it's back to that no surprises, so transparency.
So we talked about setting out, and having a fantastic first structured board meeting. I would say fantastic that we're getting the basics right. We're building that foundation in that board meeting. We've talked about building the relationship with that investment director, making sure they're on board and you know what they want and need. Have you got any other top tips for the first 100 days for a new CFO?
Yeah, there are some tactics. So there will be there'll be other businesses in the portfolio of the private equity firm. They've been through the journey that you're going through. So ask if you can talk to the CFOs or whoever in those other companies. And it's interesting. I think most people would be very welcoming of that in a private equity house. Like, yeah, great. Talk to, this person, that person, the other person. Go and sit with them. Like actually get a relationship started with those people. And that's a really good way of understanding the dynamic of private equity house. But it's often missed. And sometimes I think private equity houses don't proactively do that either. But you can ask for that. I think the dynamics inside of a firm, like those few questions we've just talked about, a private equity firm that is, try and understand that. Like, do you get into the understanding of what's happening with the fund? Mm-hmm. How long have you got to deliver the plan? How long have they got left in the fund? How well is everything else going? Are they fundraising? What is at play in this new investor in your firm that might lead to changes in priority or behavior? You understand that a bit. It's not your job to understand that in detail, but understand that in terms of broad themes. And I think that can only, again, help you. And I think the other thing I'd say is understand the leveraged buyout model more and more and more. So that is talking to any other CFO in any other private equity owned business. Educate yourself. And unless you've done 4, 5, 6 of these deals, there's always something more to learn. And by doing that, you are becoming the private equity CFO. So having done one private equity deal does not make you, a well-experienced private equity CFO. So just open yourself up to like peer learning, read if you have to. If you don't understand like the corporate finance elements of this, well, again, buddy up with a corporate finance advisor or go and educate yourself about it. But there can be guidance given by the investor director on where to go and find those types of courses and that type of education, but that cannot hurt. So that might not be the first 100 days because you're going to be busy, but you can set that up for, say, the months 4 to 6 so that you're better educated about what you're preparing for at the exit.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Rich, for a great, there's so much in that for our CFOs that are listening in this to pick up and take away in terms of actions for their first 100 days. And, if there is an area of that first 100 days, guys, our listeners, that you would like us to dig into more, then please do feel free to message myself and I'll add it to our list of questions, because this is part of a multi-stage series and we'd love your direct questions for Rich to help us inform the next set of episodes. So thank you so much, Rich, for joining me, and I can't wait to do our next episode on the PE CFO.
Brilliant. A pleasure as always.
Hey Google, what's the best accounting software for my business? Give it a couple of years, and I bet you she'll be able to answer you pretty accurately. But for now, it's still one of the few questions Google can't give you an answer for. But we can. Take our free quiz and find out which Sage product is the right fit for your business. Just head to itassolutions.co.uk.